My name is Bliss Baker. I'm the vice chair of Sussex Strategy Group, the top lobby firm in the country. I've been in the biofuels, biospace, bioeconomy space for 20-some years, and once upon a time headed up the lobbying efforts to change the laws in Canada to mandate biofuels into your gasoline and into your diesel fuel. Started that probably over 20 years ago. So I've got a long history in the bioeconomy, recognize a lot of you out there, and excited to be back here again at Scaling Up with my good friend, Mr. Passmore. We are joined today by two outstanding, very well-respected lobbyists who do a lot of work in this sector. Devin McCarthy is the guy who runs our federal practice here in Ottawa for Sussex, and Chris Hessler, who I've known for many years, owns and runs a very well-respected, I want to say K Street, but I know you're not on K Street, lobby firm in Washington DC, and also does a lot of work, spends half his life in California and Sacramento lobbying in that state. So we have two guys here who have a lot of experience lobbying and can share a lot of stories with you about their lobbying efforts to try and shape the public policy environment that we all have to work in. And I can tell you, you know this, but I can tell you firsthand that this public policy environment within which we have to work and operate our businesses doesn't just happen, right? Governments rarely do things on their own and take initiative to try and shape public policy. It happens because people push them in certain directions. And these two guys have been at the forefront of pushing governments in various directions. So I'd like to turn it over to both of you, just maybe to introduce yourselves, tell the folks a little bit about what you do during the day, what it is how you get stuff done in Washington or in Sacramento or in Ottawa, because getting stuff done in these towns is not easy. Maybe I'll turn it over to you first, Chris, and talk a little bit about how you move the needle in Washington.
Well, it's an honor to be sitting with two representatives of the best lobbying firm in Canada. This is just
who said lobbying's all about the booze? We call this currency in our business.
There you go. Yeah, that's the liquid negotiator. I sort of lost the thread on the question. Thanks, Jeff.
You're going to talk about what you do.
All right. All I'll say is this: the rule that we try and abide by at AJW is we're not selling, we're offering, and so we don't go to public officials and push them to do what we want or what our clients want. We go to offer them what they want. So understanding what they're trying to get done and how what we're asking for advances that agenda, that's for us that's the starting point. So you've got to understand what they're trying to do, and you've got to talk to people where you can be helpful, because if you're just going in and saying, yeah, I know you're working on all that stuff and you think that's really important, but this is really important, do this. It doesn't sell. I mean, can you imagine talking to your significant other and it's always about what you want and not what they want? Like, good luck with that. Except in Jeff's case.
Yeah, I mean, the term that we use for that is enlightened self-interest, right? So, I mean, we're trying to live in the center of the overlapping portion of the Venn diagram that has government agenda on one side and the client's agenda on the other side. Where they meet in the middle, that's where you're going to gain traction and be able to move the needle much more quickly. And I would also say that it's a game of momentum. A lot of our clients come to us believing that there's one meeting that they need that is just going to unlock everything. And for some reason, it was Jerry Butts. When he was the principal secretary, it was like everybody was like, I just got to get in to see Jerry Butts. I'm going to tell him the idea, and it's going to be, the floodgates open and the angels sing. And those meetings can help, right? They can build momentum. They can ensure that what a client is after is on the agenda, that there isn't a roadblock to making progress. But a lot of it is the ground game, understanding the machinery of government. How is this is achieving this objective? Does it require legislation? Is it a regulatory change? Is it a funding mechanism? What funding pot might that come from? If there isn't an existing funding pot, what might the parameters of one look like, and where might it come from? What are the sort of vehicles through which it might come into existence, and what's the pathway to that vehicle? So understanding sort of the detail of how policy making is done in Ottawa or in provincial capitals across the country is really, to me, the name of the game.
Bliss, can I just riff on that with two more little quick points?
Yeah, of course.
So number one, don't believe your own gospel. Like, everybody's got a good story to tell, but there's another side. There's so don't be so convinced of the rightness of your story. And I think that's a little bit of where you were going with it. You've got to interact with other people and take on board their perspective. And the second thing is, and this is a huge problem in the industrial bioeconomy space, the lack of coalition, the lack of working across lines with other organizations. Even in the bioeconomy space, people are fighting with each other because they're thinking about public policy conversations the way they think about investment conversations. You want to go out there and say, we're best in class. Well, that's great if you're talking to investors. It doesn't work when you're talking to policymakers. It's got to lift a lot of boats, so find those other boats.
Actually, that's a very good point. I've spent a lot of my time in a previous life as chair of the Renewable Fuels Association trying to make sure that we were all on the same page with cellulose ethanol, corn ethanol, and biodiesel. We used to fight amongst ourselves like crazy behind the scenes, but publicly we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that we were not knocking each other. We were knocking the oil industry back then, 20 years ago. So talk a little bit about tactics. I mean, lobbying in the U.S. is a little bit different than lobbying up here. I've experienced both. The entertainment value in the U.S. is way higher. But tactically, we pressure governments to do things in various ways. It doesn't work to embarrass governments by going to the opposition and getting them to, make a speech on the floor somewhere and embarrass them. But tactically, where's the fine line between pressuring them to do something publicly and not crossing that line to the point where you've just experienced some awful blowback? What's your experience, Devin, in terms of pressuring governments to do things? Because we all know that if you're not there with a sustained effort, your chances of success are zero. You have to be there 24/7 pushing your agenda. Where's the fine line in all this?
Yeah, I think my baseline is persistence with a smile. You've got to be in their emails, you've got to be in front of them as much as possible, making that evidence-based case for the outcomes that you're advocating for. But there are a lot of other techniques. I mean, it's not many clients who have any real leverage over government decision-making. So you're making that case, but where you can find a bit of leverage is in the public discourse that is occurring around these policy changes. And so we have some proprietary, we have a digital advocacy wing within Sussex Strategy Group and some proprietary platforms that allow us to generate high volume letter campaigns and that sort of thing, social media presence, et cetera, very quickly. We have a full communications shop and can assist with placing op-eds and other materials like that. But I've also had clients who overstep and think that they do have a lot more leverage than they have, and it usually doesn't work very well. I had one client probably 2 years ago who will remain nameless, but they were using a different communication firm, not us. We were the GR, had somebody else for comms, and I got a call on Sunday evening, and they said, we're going to run this ad starting tomorrow. Just want to, we thought we were talking about it, we were like, we should probably give the GR folks a heads up. And I listened to it, and it was basically an attack ad on the Liberal government. I was like, can you please not? Can you please not do that? And they did it. And then, we're like, essentially tell PMO, we'll stop running it if they come to the table on this discussion. And I took that to PMO and had the conversation, and they were like, it did not go over very well. Let's just put it that way. And it took, then they left that communications firm, came with us, and it took, it's taken 2 years to repair those relationships.
And Devin took credit for killing the negative ad campaign.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was.
It never works.
It never works. But
Chris,
go
DC's
ahead,
a
Chris.
little
I'm sure you
different.
have some tales from the trenches.
DC's a little different. I've experienced it firsthand. Some of the aggressive communications efforts. Is the fine line down there a little further out, or is that changing? What's the sentiment there?
So what Devin's describing is really how I think about it, right? It's like, everything you've said. It's the big man theory, the one big meeting, that's not going to work. You've got to know the issue top down. I generally believe the most successful strategy is to understand the policymaker you're talking to is super busy and they know far less about your issue than you do. You need to go out and solve their problems for them. If they say, yeah, I'd love to, but I can't get this coalition or that set of members on board, you got to go out and help them make it easy for them so they're skiing downhill. But is the line further out? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of bombast in Washington and it's getting worse every day. I don't think in the long run it's the right way to do it, but it definitely occasionally gets results. But just recently, to tell on myself, we had a client who had reached their limit and had been really patient with a particular office in California, and deservedly was frustrated. And they said, well, we're going to write a strongly worded letter and we're going to make it public. And I went and said to these guys, look, if you can't give us a reason not to do it, we're going to have to do this. You have to understand what's going on our side. I don't want to surprise you, but we're going to write a strongly worded letter. And he goes, I get it. Okay, we'll get a strongly worded letter. I didn't do the last step, which was calling him up, a day or two before the letter was coming, because he was going to get a lot of incoming calls from other folks that he worked for about this letter. And I just dropped that stitch, and he was not pleased with me. But we have a great relationship because I've never done anything like that before, and we were able to very quickly get back on track. That's, these are relationships. Mm-hmm. You've got to treat them like relationships and guard them like.
It's funny you tell that story because I've done that. Had a client push me to write the strongly worded letter, which blew up in my face, and then I had to force my way into the chief of staff's office a week later with another letter, and I walked in the door and she said to me, let me guess, that's the I didn't mean to send the first letter. How did you guess? Fortunately, because we had a relationship and a positive one, we were able to recover. But
people start shooting when they run out of other ideas.
Exactly.
And so use all your other ideas first.
Yeah. Let's shift gears here for a minute. Last year when we were here, the Inflation Reduction Act was weeks old. Canada was still at the point where I think they were navel-gazing, trying to decide what to do, or they had just responded. Now, I've got to give the federal government some credit. They responded uncharacteristically fast to the IRA after about a month of navel-gazing, and quite aggressively, I thought. We can talk a little bit about what's transpired since then, but under the IRA, Chris, billions of dollars are promised to flow. I think some of it's flowing. Tell us a little bit about what's happening in the U.S., who's benefiting from it, and where's the money going?
So we've got evidence of really large investments flowing all over the place, but we still have a lot of details that haven't come out. Some of the fine print on these tax credits haven't come out, and so there are big questions about fuels and hydrogen and feedstocks that haven't been resolved yet. What counts, what doesn't, how will it count? So there has already been an avalanche of deal making lining up. Major multinational corporations are getting in this game in a very big way, and regardless of the details, they're going to go forward with projects of some description. The details will matter about which projects they go forward with. The IRA has definitely change things in terms of bringing, I want to say American businesses, but businesses that work in America into the game, into the fight, because now there's a much more clear profit opportunity, and they're chasing it for the long term. They're not in it for the one plant with the one grant from the DOE. They're in it for what that plant turns into when it's the nth plant.
Devin, the Liberal government here responded to the IRA, as I said, pretty quickly after some futzing around for a month, and maybe it was less than that, but they didn't know how to respond. And then they responded pretty quickly with investment tax credits. Mm-hmm. I was actually quite amazed when they did respond. Talk about that for a minute.
Sure. When IRA was passed in August of last year, we had a number of conversations with political offices here in Ottawa. What was Canada's response going to be? How are they feeling about it? The initial reaction those first 3 or 4 weeks was very much, this is the U.S. catching up with us, not the other. We don't need to now catch up with them. It's the other way around. We put $100 billion on the table in investment supports already. We have a more robust national policy framework than they have in the U.S. This is the U.S. catching up with us. And then over sort of 3 or 4 weeks, probably 3 or 4 weeks later, let's say towards the end of September, it was clear, and the message, and I think the evidence. I mean, there were companies sharing their models, comparing projects in the U.S. under IRA and Canada under the existing incentives and policies in place at that time, and they just didn't compare. And I think Ottawa really got live to that, and then it was a dash to the fall economic statement. I know on the bioeconomy side, on the biofuels and biomass, I mean, that was left out of the investment tax credits. I mean, the reasons that I've heard since then and heard at the time was that the cost structure was more in the feedstocks. The ITCs are more capital investment incentives, which isn't sort of the challenge in this space as much as feedstock supply and cost structure. I do think that the government has come around. It's taken them a little longer in this sector to come around to why investment tax credits are needed and are the right tool at the right time for the sector. But I do believe they're there. I hope they're there. We have the fall economic statement coming in a few weeks, so we'll see how much the extent to which it's addressed in that document. But I'm actually pretty hopeful that we're going to see some positive outcomes in a few weeks.
Let's hope so. Minister Wilkinson, I was at an event with him 2 weeks ago where he talked about exploring the idea of including biomass in the investment tax credit. Take him at his word that they're doing that. It sounds like they're looking at it. I think it was a massive oversight that they did not include it initially, especially when the U.S. has included it in their regulations. So we're hopeful that in the fall economic statement, there is a reference to biomass, including in the ITCs. It has to say something, the power of the IRA, because this town does not like investment tax credits. The Department of Finance hates them. They see it and call it tax leakage. It's lost revenue from their perspective, and which makes you crazy because when you think about it, it's not leakage at all. But that's the view in this town, and so the fact that they've introduced them is incredible. We just wish they would hurry up and deploy them a little quicker, Chris.
There is an extra cost when we're doing something additional. When we're just providing energy and we don't care about the externalities, then that's the commodity cost of energy. But there is an extra cost when decarbonization is part of the formula, and someone has to bear that cost. It can be the taxpayer, it can be the regulated entity and then their customer, but someone's going to bear the cost. It's inescapable.
Yeah, and I wish I had $1 for every time I heard somebody in this town tell me that we can't compete with the U.S. Treasury, right? We just can't. That may be true, but that's not the point, right? The point is we have biomass in this country. we have every opportunity that the U.S. and other countries have to develop a bioeconomy. And we're not trying to compete with the U.S. Treasury, but it becomes an excuse for doing nothing, right? Which is the tragic part. So hopefully, Devin, that we're going to see some more activity. Maybe in fall economic statement, we'll see some more comments on the ITCs.
Yeah, and to me, you spoke about coalitions earlier, and I think over the past year there has been wonderful coalition, both building and deployment in this sector to drive that conversation forward. You speak with Minister Wilkinson's office, you speak with the energy policy folks in the Deputy Prime Minister's office, and they're like, biomass is what I'm taking meetings on all the time. It's who's knocking on the door, it's who wants in on the next round, and we're hearing that, and we're live to it, we're trying to figure it out. But you have put yourself squarely at the forefront of the agenda, and kudos to you for doing so.
Let's switch gears here for a minute. This wouldn't be a political panel if we didn't talk about elections or small p politics. Next year is an election year in the U.S. The smart money is thinking that we may be going to the polls next year in Canada as well. What does this mean first for all of these programs, the IRA, the bioeconomy? What are the implications there? And then maybe we can prod you to make a prediction or two. Devin, you want to go?
Sure. So yeah, we do have we've had an interesting past few weeks with respect to climate policy in Canada, and I think that is going to continue until Election Day, whenever that falls. I mean, right now the Conservatives are squarely ahead in the polls. The latest sort of composite poll on 338canada.com has them at 40%. The Liberals at 27%. That's about 200 and I think it's 215 seats for the Conservatives, 85 for the Liberals, down from 158 seats. So it's not looking good right now for the Liberals. Now, does that extend the time to election because they can't go to an election at this point, and the NDP doesn't see much advantage in doing so either, and so continues to prop them up. We shall see, but I think it's pretty safe to say that change is in the air. And so, one of the things that I'm very focused on is what does energy policy look like under a Poilievre government? And I've been speaking with his team about that with a number of clients. And I think clearly axe the tax is very real, ending the distributed carbon price that we have across Canada. I think they'll maintain the industrial carbon pricing system, the OBPS, but kill the distributed fuel charge. Clean fuel standard is squarely a target. I think the ITCs would remain in some level. The exact wording that I got very recently was more outcomes-based and less prescriptive on the individual technologies. What exactly that looks like in design very much remains to be seen. What the U.S. does with IRA. I mean, clearly our development of the ITCs was in response to what the Americans did, and so what a future Republican government, for example, or administration does in the U.S., I think will weigh heavily on what Poilievre government does here. But I think, all I would say is that policy agenda is still very much being formed, and I think there's an opportunity to spend time now with Poilievre and his team, including his shadow cabinet, to make the case for why the bioeconomy is good for Canada, and it's good for our industrial policy, it's good for energy affordability over time, and there's merits in not allowing the pendulum to swing back and forth on this sector.
And Chris, is there any chance a Republican administration unwinds the IRA, or do they just find a few sacrificial lambs? What's your best bet?
But my best bet is the latter, that there'll be, if there's a Republican administration, they're going to need a scalp or two out of the IRA that they can claim and say, they rolled back these expensive tax credits. But there's a lot of there are a lot of industries that are going to line up and defend all of these different provisions. Again, the hydrogen tax credit, the fuels tax credit. There are big companies that want those, as well as folks that are in it on the environment. But just going back to this axe to tax thing, the relative stability or instability of these policies, people have been talking about it all day, right? We need long-term investment, we need stable policy. It comes down to people really need to take this thing seriously. What is the message to the individual voter? The Economist had a really good piece on this just a month or so ago. If you're positioning this as it's an added expense or an added inconvenience on the average citizen in your democracy, good luck holding on to that. It's disrespectful of people's time if you're saying, well, we get that, it's a pain in the ass to charge your electric vehicle when you're taking the kids on a family trip and you got to pull over and find the right place and go out of your way and it's a half an hour to charge. That's really disrespectful of the lives that everybody lives to think that all of us are going to prioritize decarbonization to that extent. And if you don't expect backlash from things that fall that way, you're kidding yourself and you're making it harder to decarbonize because you're introducing instability.
Chris, you touched on something that somebody asked me this afternoon about the bioeconomy, and they asked me, do you think we've passed the tipping point on the bioeconomy? Because, I look back 20 years ago when we were lobbying for ethanol, our big worry was we would get, a small program from the federal government, and then it would all the fizzle would just go away, and then we would, get clawed back from a future government, and it would just be just a bad experiment and a distant memory 10 years out, right? What are your thoughts on where we're at with the bioeconomy? Have governments seized the day? Are we past the tipping point in this sector?
I think we're past the tipping point on energy system transition writ large. I've been working in energy policy for almost 20 years, and it has been a one-way street of a drive to decarbonizing. First, while I was at the Electricity Association, and now in my work as a consultant, supporting that transition through in the industrial space, in the built environment, in agriculture, power sector, transportation, you name it. We heard from the airlines folks today. This is a one-way street. So I think there is good recognition, and I think the Polyev team sees it as moving in one direction, not a U-turn opportunity. It's just a matter of making the case for why the bioeconomy needs to be one of the key pillars to that going forward, and I don't know that it's achieved that yet.
This isn't the first scaling up conference in which someone sat on this platform and observed, as happened earlier today, that much of the environmental community is resistant to the inclusion of industrial bioeconomy strategies for reasons that we can parse, but so the truth is we need everything. We need it all, and we need it now. And these ideas that we're going to pursue a mono technology solution until maybe it fails and then we'll try something else. The truth is we need it all now. The problem with the truth, as is often observed, is the truth is like poetry, and everybody hates freaking poetry.
Well, Chris, this is not a new phenomenon. 20 years ago, I was hearing from the NGOs that ethanol was terrible, and it wasn't as clean as it should be, et cetera, and my response always was, compared to what, right? So that's not a new song they're singing, but I want to end on a lighter note. As lobbyists here, the three of us have attended thousands of meetings over the years, literally thousands. Many of them have been like eye-watering, tedious, migraine-inducing sessions with elected officials, bureaucrats, etc. A lot of them have been fun, engaging, and educational. But some of them have been just crazy. I mean, some of this, we were talking this afternoon about, let's share a story or two about some of the crazy shit that's happened to us while we've been lobbyists. And 90% of it we can't share with you here. We'll share with you over scotch in 10 minutes. We literally couldn't come up with one that we could share, but we have a couple. So as you can imagine, we spend a lot of time with elected officials. We go to events, fundraisers, you name it, dinners and boozy meetings and all kinds of things. It's not always like that because there were thousands of tedious meetings. But over the course of the last 20 years, I've been punched by the Prime Minister. I shared the stage with Jesse Ventura when he was the governor of Minnesota on a political panel, which was bizarre, and got invited back to the mansion after. I've experienced New Jersey politics up close, which Chris knows very well is they invented cement shoes in New Jersey. And so I asked these guys to share a story or two about some of the crazy stuff that we've experienced, or funny, or scary, or dumb, whatever stories. But I'll give you one. Not being punched by Chrétien, Prime Minister Chrétien, but we were lobbying for the biofuels industry. A year into it, we were getting lots of traction. And the only stumbling block was Department of Finance. And so we finally had a good breakthrough there. We had a big meeting, casts of thousands there, the deputy minister, you name it. It was a big meeting. It wasn't going to get it done for us, but it was a very important meeting. So we rehearsed, we practiced, we literally wrote it out. We rehearsed the night before. We get to the meeting, we sit down, room's full, very serious boardroom over at Finance. So I start off with my presentation. I spend 5 minutes introducing the subject, and then I turn to my esteemed colleague, our dear host here today, to turn it over to him, and he's sound asleep. Now, what do you do with that situation? Anyway, so we had lots of fun things that happened to us over the years, lobbying, crazy stuff like that. You guys, I know you have good stories, some of which you can even share. Devin, is there anything that jumps to mind?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly meetings.
The alpaca story?
I will take to that I will remember for the rest of my career. You know, a client throwing a chair in a minister's office. A lot of apologies to staff afterwards, and rebuilding those bridges. So no, these things happen. But by and large, I mean, I would say that you know, one of the most nervous I've been in my career actually was this was in 2017, early 2017. Trump had just been elected. And I convinced a group of electricity sector CEOs to be one of the first groups down in Washington after inauguration to meet with the White House. You know, we're selling $3 billion worth of electricity to the states each year. We're buying back only $200 million. He's talking about trade imbalances, but he's also talking about North American energy security. And it's like, okay, like we are that. He cares about who his friends are, who's reaching out, who's coming to see him, and so does his team. So let's get down there pretty early. It was an annual trip that we did down to Washington, and so you know, the whole game in early 2017, the first couple months of his presidency, was don't be the subject of a tweet, if people can remember those months. And so, I mean, we just felt like we were on a knife's edge going down to Washington to meet with the White House, with Pence's team, with senators, Kevin Cramer, for example, North Dakota, border state senators and members of Congress. And, you know, and we were actually met so positively and so nicely. It was sort of that first meeting that we have. I think it was with Kevin Cramer. Who was part of the transition team, Trump insider, met with him, and and he was all roses. We love Canada. We love Canadian electricity. We need more of it. You guys are inside the tent when we think about North American energy security. And it was like you could see all the CEOs were like, okay, this is going to be okay. And I was like, thank God, I'm not going to get fired. And it went really well. So I guess I say that to say the Poilievre administration is coming, likely. Better than 90% chance. Reach out, have those engagements, because there's always more common ground to find than you might think.
Chris, I know you have a story.
Well, given the Scotch imperative and the fact that 98% of my stories I'll never say into a microphone, I'll just say this. I've got a sign in my office that was a framed bumper sticker a friend gave to me, and it says, don't tell my mother I'm a lobbyist. She thinks I'm a piano player in a whorehouse.
Well, that's a great note to end on.